Mr. President, what do you say to people who view that luxury jet as a personal gift to you? Why not leave it behind?
Your ABC fake news, right?
Why not?
Only ABC. Well, you should be embarrassed asking that question.
The provided article meticulously chronicles President Donald Trump's repeated and aggressive confrontations with journalists over a singular, highly controversial topic, a $400 million jet gifted to the United States by the royal family of Qatar. These incidents are not isolated outbursts, but reveal a consistent and well-defined communication strategy that deliberately prioritizes attacking the media's credibility over genuinely engaging with the substance of their questions. This tactic, which became a foundational hallmark of his presidency, serves as a powerful illustration of how he would systematically deflect scrutiny by launching broadsides against the press and assiduously creating a narrative of a hostile, biased media. The jet controversy provides a perfect case study for this approach, highlighting how he would turn what should have been a straightforward ethical inquiry into a broader battle against the press as an institution. This pattern of behavior became so routine that it could almost be predicted with certainty whenever a challenging question was posed. The strategic redirection of focus from his actions to the alleged motives of the media was a cornerstone of his public communication, allowing him to bypass legitimate concerns and instead rally his base against a common perceived enemy. One of the most prominent and illustrative examples of this strategy unfolded during a high-stakes White House press conference that followed Trump's meeting with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. The article specifically notes that prior to this press event, Trump had shown Ramaphosa images related to the deeply provocative and politically charged subject of white genocide. This pre-press conference event established a tense, emotionally charged, and confrontational tone, creating an environment where a sharp, aggressive reaction to a seemingly routine question was not only possible, but highly probable. It set the stage for a dramatic and acrimonious exchange. When NBC News reporter Peter Alexander, a veteran journalist with a well-respected career, asked Trump about the Qatari jet, the president's response was far from a simple defensive maneuver. It was a full-scale, personal, and professional assault. He immediately dismissed the question as a deliberate attempt by the media to distract from what he deemed the more important topic of his meeting with Ramaphosa. By framing the query as a deliberate effort by a biased media to divert attention from a serious issue, he suggested that the reporter's focus was not just misplaced, but inherently disingenuous and agenda-driven. He cast himself as the victim of a media conspiracy, a lone figure standing against a torrent of unfair and malicious attacks. This narrative shift was crucial, as it allowed him to frame his own actions as a form of self-defense rather than a refusal to answer. Trump's attack on Alexander was intensely personal and condescending, designed to belittle and discredit him publicly in front of his peers and a national audience. He called him a terrible reporter and, in a particularly cutting and demeaning remark, questioned his intellect by stating that he was not smart enough to be a journalist. This personal critique was not the end of the matter. It quickly broadened to encompass the entire NBC News organization. Trump accused the network's leadership, including its chairman Brian Roberts, of being terrible and even suggested they ought to be investigated by the government, a thinly veiled threat of political retaliation. He labeled the entire network as a disgrace and a disaster, before pointedly and publicly telling Alexander that he would not be taking any more questions from him, effectively blacklisting the reporter in front of his peers. Throughout this relentless barrage, Trump's central defense was that the jet was a generous and legitimate gift to the United States Air Force, a national asset, not a personal one. He framed the gift as a symbol of a strong and mutually beneficial relationship with Qatar, which he said also included a massive $5.1 trillion investment in the U.S. economy. By doing this, he skillfully attempted to reposition the reporter's question not as a valid and necessary inquiry into a potential ethical conflict, but as a cynical, unpatriotic attack on a positive diplomatic and military development. This strategic redirection allowed him to completely bypass the core ethical questions and instead focus on the perceived failings, biases, and incompetence of the media, thereby transforming the press conference into a political rally against his critics. He effectively turned a defensive moment into an offensive one, seizing control of the narrative and forcing his opponents onto their back foot. The article emphasizes that this confrontation was far from an isolated, one-off incident. It notes a nearly identical clash that had occurred with an ABC News reporter over the very same issue just a few weeks earlier, demonstrating a clear and predictable pattern of behavior. When the ABC reporter, attempting to fulfill his journalistic duty, asked if the luxurious jet could be perceived as a personal gift, Trump responded with a similar level of intense hostility and aggression. He told the reporter they should be embarrassed for even asking such a question and swiftly broadened his attack to the entire network, calling ABC a disaster. The reporter, attempting to provide crucial context and follow-up, asked if Trump, in his long and storied career as a businessman, had ever received a multi-million-dollar gift without providing anything of tangible value in return. Trump, however, would not allow him to finish his question. He forcefully interrupted him, reiterating that the gift was intended for the Department of Defense, not for him personally, and once again dismissed the reporter's entire line of questioning as biased, incompetent, and driven by a nefarious agenda. The sheer repetition of this exact pattern, down to the specific language used and the targets of his attacks, strongly suggests a deliberate, highly rehearsed, and disciplined communication strategy. The predictability of his response underscores its strategic nature. It was a well-practiced routine, not an impulsive reaction. These two incidents collectively demonstrate a clear and consistent communication strategy. When confronted with a question he found to be challenging, critical, or potentially damaging, Trump would consistently divert the conversation away from the substance of the inquiry itself. Instead of providing a detailed, factual response, he would launch a preemptive offensive, viciously attacking the credibility of the journalists and their news organizations. His tactics involved a potent and predictable combination of personal insults, broad condemnations of the media as an institution, and a deliberate reframing of the issue to his political and personal advantage. By asserting that the jet was a national asset for the U.S. military, a powerful symbol of international cooperation, he was able to portray the media's legitimate questions as not only biased, but also as an attack on the military and successful diplomacy. This strategy effectively turned a question of ethics into a question of media integrity, allowing him to dismiss valid and necessary inquiries as examples of fake news and an agenda-driven press. He created a narrative where he was not the one being questioned, but rather the heroic figure fighting back against a hostile, unfair, and dishonest media establishment. This approach allowed him to avoid detailed explanations and instead rally his base of supporters against what he presented as a corrupt, biased, and un-American press. The article shows that for Trump, the best defense was often a strong and sustained offense, and the frequent target was the messenger rather than the message itself. This calculated deflection was not merely a way to avoid a difficult question. It was a method of reinforcing his political brand and strengthening the bond with his supporters by casting himself as a victim of a powerful and malevolent establishment.